Morning, everyone. We are on DAF Vav and Aleph, and we were learning yesterday that when a non-Jew leaves his chametz in my home, the criterion as to whether or not I have a responsibility for it, whether I'm going to be violating Bal Yirah, Bal Yimatzeh, is if I have financial responsibility for it. If it's completely his and I have no financial responsibility for it, I'm allowed to keep it in my home. It's not my chametz, and it's fine. If I have financial liability, so then I'm in violation because it's considered to be mine. So in a related issue, let's learn about when a non-Jew has a financial stake in the possession of a Jew. So Ba'o Minei Rava, they asked Rava the following question: Behemas arnuna chayeves bebechora o ein chayeves bebechora? We know that a firstborn animal, right, Maseches Becharos, is all about a firstborn animal, has a special Kedusha status that has to be brought as a korban or given to the Kohen. And the question is, what would be the situation where we know that there's a halacha that if a non-Jew is a partner, even a partial partner, with the Jew in the ownership of a firstborn animal, the animal is patur from Bechora, which means it does not acquire any Kedusha status. So the question now is, what happens if the king has rights of tax confiscation of a certain percentage of my herd? Does that now give him an ownership stake in my entire herd, such that all the firstborn animals of my herd are exempt from the Bechora, or not? So Kol Heicha Dematzi Mesalek Le Bezuzi Lo Komi Boilan Dechayev. The Gemara explains, when I, as the farmer, have the opportunity to just pay the king a cash tax instead of giving him actual animals, then it's clear that the animals are completely within my purview and there's Kedushas Bechor that sets into my firstborn. The question is, what if I don't have that option? What if the king has the option to always say, no, I want the animal? And he can take, let's say, 10% of my herd. So therefore, he's an owner, he's a partial owner, he's got an ownership stake in the herd, and therefore, would you say that exempts the animals from Bechora or not? So Amr Lahu Petura. So Rabbi says, no, he's a partial owner, and therefore the entire herd is patur from Bechora. The Hatanya Chayeves, there's another brisa that says that in a case of Arnona, of a confiscation tax, you're still chayev in the Kedusha. Hasam Dematzi Mesalek. There, that brisa is talking about where the farmer has the option of paying the king cash as the tax instead of the animals, and therefore he's considered to be the exclusive owner of the herd. Ikada Amri, others learn, Amar Rava, Behemas Arnona Petura Min HaBechora, Ve'afal Gav Dematzi Mesalek. Others learn that Rava said that there's an exemption from the Bechora anytime the king has rights of tax confiscation, even when the farmer has the option of paying him cash instead of giving him the animal. And what's the reason? Because up until that point where I actually give him the cash, the king is considered to be a partial owner. The fact that I can pay him instead of giving him the animal is an option that I can exercise, but up until that point, the king is still considered to be a stakeholder in my herd. And Isas Arnona Chayeves Bechala Ve'afal Gavdelo Matzi Mesalek. But then we give a contrast, and that is that there's another kind of Arnona. The other kind of Arnona is when not only is there a confiscation tax on what do you call heads of cattle, but there's also a confiscation tax on baked goods. So that if the king can come along and say, I'm confiscating all dough, a certain percentage of dough that you manufacture, it goes to the king for his army or whatever it is. So then, even though normally the halacha is that when a Jew and a non-Jew are partners in dough, the dough is patur from challah tithes. Nevertheless, in this case, the challah is still obligated in challah tithes, even when the king cannot be paid off with cash instead of dough. You can't give him dough instead of dough, right? Why is that? Because so my time, what's the difference between the two? Behema isla kala, isa lesla kala. Explains the Gemara is that there's more of a public acknowledgement when it comes to animals. People understand that the reason why I'm not submitting my firstborn animal to the kedusha of a bechor and giving him to the kohen is because the king confiscates herd, the king confiscates cattle. But when it comes to dough, because it's a much more private kind of confiscation event, people don't know about it, and people will see me baking bread without taking challah tithes, and they're going to suspect that I'm eating tevel, I'm eating untithed challah, and so untithed bread. And as a result, it's really a din d'Rabbanan, that even though technically you could argue that mid'oraisa it's butter from challah, the Chachamim nevertheless instituted the chiyuv of taking challah, because people won't, it'll be like a maras ayin, and people won't realize that it's because the king is a shareholder, a stakeholder in the dough.
With the bracha?
We're not talking about a bracha now. We don't know about brachas. I go to the Shulchan Aruch and you'll see. In other words, a lot. Someone else asked me about brachas, like on Bedikas Chametz. Brachas are a totally different subject. They're related in practice, but in sugyas and Talmudic logic, we don't discuss brachas until we get to a different sugya. It's a valid question. It's just not the topic of discussion. Tanu Rabbanan. The Brisa now states, Nachri shenichnas lachatzero shel Yisrael ubetzeko biyado ein zakuk levaer. That if a non-Jew walks into my courtyard with his dough, he's holding a loaf of bread in his hand, then I am not obligated to destroy or eliminate that chametz if he comes in on Erev Pesach, or if he comes in at any time over Pesach, because it's not my chametz, it's his chametz. Hifkido etzlo zakuk levaer. If, however, the non-Jew gives me chametz for safekeeping, so then I do have to eliminate it before chametz. And Rashi explains that here we're talking about a case where I assumed financial responsibility for it, like we learned yesterday. That whenever a Jew assumes financial responsibility, so then it becomes like his chametz, and he has to remove it before Pesach. Yichid lo bayis ein zakuk levaer. If, however, the Jew designates a place on his property where the Gentile can store his chametz, then I don't have to eliminate the chametz, because again, Rashi explains, we're talking about a case where I don't assume financial responsibility. I basically tell the non-Jew, here, this space is now yours, do with it as you please, I have nothing to do with it. So the Jew sort of recuses himself completely from that spot. He says, it's your spot, do with it as you please, and it's got nothing to do with me.
And similar when you're selling the chametz for Pesach to non-Jew.
Well, it's not really a sale. You're not really selling. You're basically telling the goy, I take no responsibility. It's your chametz. Shenamar, because it's not. It was never my chametz. In selling your chametz, then you're literally transferring ownership from yourself to the goy. Here, there's no transfer. It was never mine to begin with. Okay. Shenamar lo yimatze. And what's the source text? The source text is, as the Torah says, there shall be no chametz found in your homes. Now, the question, of course, is, Maika Amar, what is the pasuk coming to support? Amar Rav Papa Areisha Koi. Rav Papa says it's coming on the Reisha, which tells me that V'hachi Kamar Hifkido Etzlo Zakuk Levar Shnemer Lo Yimatze. That when the previous statement of the Brisa was that if the goy leaves chametz with me for safekeeping, then I'm responsible, and I have to remove it because the Torah says lo yimatze, that I'm not allowed to have any chametz in my possession, and this is considered to be in my possession because I've assumed responsibility. That's what the pasuk is teaching. Rav Ashi Omar la'olam ha'seifa koi. Rav Ashi says no. The pasuk of lo yimatze, which implies iser, is actually going on the last case, which is a heter. But how do you interpret it? V'hachi ka'amar yichid lo bayis ein zakuk levaer. That if I designate a place for the goy to store his chametz on my property, then I don't have to remove it before Pesach. Shenemar lo yimatze bevatechem v'holav didehu denachri k'kama ayol lebesa denafshe kama ayol. And the reason why I'm not responsible is based on the pasuk. The pasuk says it may not be found in your home. So when I designate a spot on my property for the non-Jew, I basically have relinquished that property over to the goy. So when he brings the chametz into that place, it's basically bringing it into his house, not bringing it into my house. And so therefore the pasuk is really telling me that the only time there's an isser is when it's in my house. But it's not in my house, it's in his house now. Even though it's on my property and my name is still on the title of the property, but nevertheless, for purposes of chametz ownership, he's considered to be the owner of that place now.
And that's the way the sale works, because the stuff is in our house and it's sold to a goy. And it's like the goy has a piece of our.
And the goy owns the spot
in our house where the chametz is.
Where the chametz is, right?
So whether you learn the ratio.
But actually, one second, Shlomi. The reason why he owns the spot is not a necessary prerequisite for the chametz belonging to him.
It could be anywhere.
It could be anywhere.
But it's in our house.
But well.
So I'm just pointing out. I'm pointing out the similarity to the Gemara.
Yeah, it is similar. Yeah. The reason why we give the goy the place of ownership, my understanding is because that's one of the methods of kinyan. A goy acquires the chametz agav the property. Right. Anyway, that's a different discussion. Yes.
But regardless whether you learn the ratio way or the safer way, what if the king has a lien both on your actual property and on your chametz?
The king. Oh, so we're not talking about that case anymore. That was the previous case.
Is that considered your chametz though anymore?
Well, if the king and I are joint owners.
No, if the king has a tax confiscation lien on their.
Yeah, no, it's still partially my chametz. If it's anything, even if I own b'shutfus with a goy, let's go even further than the king. Go even further. The king has. Not only does the king have rights of confiscation, he's a 50% owner with me in the chametz. I'm still partially an owner of the chametz. I'm still in violation, right? The reason why we brought in the case of the king's lien is because it's related to our discussion of what, access rights.
So before it's also joint, but the fact that it's joint takes away the bechorah.
Takes away the bechorah, right? So now the Gemara says, "L'meimer dischiras kanya." Now, are you suggesting, says the Gemara, that when I lease out property to a tenant, the tenant now becomes the sole exclusive owner of that property for halachic purposes? Let me show you a case where that's not the case. V'hatznan af b'makom shamru lahaskir lo lebeis dira amru b'pnei shemachnisin l'socho avodas galilim. Now, there's a halacha in avodah zarah that says that you're not allowed to lease out property to idolaters inside of Eretz Yisrael, but you are allowed to lease out places of rental for idolaters on the outskirts of Eretz Yisrael, like in Syria. But then the Gemara clarifies further and says, but you're only allowed to lease out barn space, but living space you cannot rent out to them, because they bring in avodah zarah, they bring in actual getchkas, they bring in actual idolatry into the places where they live. So the question the Gemara asks is, V'isal kadaitich deschiris kan ki koma ayla beisei denavshi koma ayl. And if the halacha is that whenever I lease out a property, it's the exclusive purview now of the non-Jew, so who cares if he's going to bring his avodah zarah in there? It's his property. It's got nothing to do with me anymore, so what's the big deal? Right? You hear the question? Yeah. So the Gemara answers, Shaini hacha da'avke rachmana b'loshan lo yimatzei, mi shematzoi biyadcha, yatzezeh she'eno matzoi biyadcha. The Gemara says, you're right. You have to distinguish between avodah zarah and chametz. By avodah zarah, the very fact that my name is still on the title, even though the property is exclusively his vis-a-vis his rights, it's still, we're not allowed to create any connection between avodah zarah and something which is my owned property. But when it comes to chametz, it has to be within my purview of control in order for there to be an actual isser of bal yimatzeh, because the Torah says it may not be found with you. So with you means that I have to have control over the property. Now that I've given it over, relinquished it to the goy, I have no control over it, so I'm no longer in violation of bal yimatzeh. By the way, it's an interesting question which I don't know the answer to offhand. Can I rent out my rental property to a Buddhist? Be an interesting shaila, because they bring in avodah zarah mamish into the house. If you ever go into a Buddhist's home, they have a little getchka in the corner where they put food every morning. It's an interesting shaila. Can I rent out? I own a condo. Can I rent out my condo to a Buddhist based on the possibility that he's going to bring avodah zarah mamish into?
But you said the Indians only in Eretz Yisrael.
No, this is outside of Eretz Yisrael. Even outside of Eretz Yisrael, you can only give him barn space. You can't give him living space.
As a landlord, you still have rights to enter if you need to make repairs. Or
right, but that apparently doesn't rise to the level of bal yimatzeh. Okay. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Hamotzei chametz beveso biyom tov kofel lo yasakli. So Rav says that if a person finds chametz in his house on Yantif, so he's not allowed to burn it. The chametz is muktzeh, so what is he supposed to do? His only option is to take a bowl and place it over it so that people won't find it mistakenly and forget it's Pesach and eat it. Amar Rava im shal hektishu ein tzarich. My time mivdal bedili minei. If, however, says Rava, if the food that's chametz that is found on Yantif is hektish, so then you don't need to cover it, because people will identify it as hektish and will know to stay away. People don't eat hektish. It's possible that a person will eat chametz on Pesach because he'll forget, because Pesach is only 8 days out of the year. But something's that hektish, no one's going to go near it because of the reverence of the Beis HaMikdash.
How does he know it's a hektish?
Maybe someone will tell him, oh, that's hektish, or you find it in a place where it's indicative that's indicated. V'amar Rav Yehuda Marav, Chemso shel nachri, oselo mechitza asar tfacha mishum heker. Rab also said that if you're storing a Gentile's chametz where you take no financial responsibility, even though you're not in violation of Bal Yimatzeh, but nevertheless you have to erect a partition of at least 10 tfachim high to create a physical barricade between yourself and the chametz. There, just covering it is insufficient. Like Rashi points out, covering it is only a stopgap measure when you find it on Yantif, because the next day you'll destroy it. But here, when you're keeping it for all 7 days of Pesach, you have to mamish create a mechitza in order to create a real, more substantive barricade. The im shel hektishu einos arch. But if it's hektish chametz, then you don't even have to erect the mechitza for the same reason. My time a mivdal bedili in shimine, because people will know not to go near it. Amar Rav Yehuda Marav hamefaresh v'hayotzi b'shiyara. Next halacha: if a person is taking a trip far away, so kodem shloshim yom ein zakuk levayer, toch shloshim yom zakuk levayer. If he leaves on his trip before Purim, there's 30 days before Pesach, so then he doesn't even have to physically get rid of the chametz that's in his house. If, however, he leaves after Purim, within 30 days of Pesach, then he has to eliminate the chametz from his house. Now, the basis of this is based upon a principle that when a person completely has chametz that is inaccessible to him, even though it's still in his possession, but chametz that is completely inaccessible is considered to be no longer yours. Like the Gemara talks about a mapolis, which we'll learn about later on. If a building collapses and underneath that building is my chametz, I'm not obligated to physically get rid of it because it's precluded from my accessibility, and therefore I'm not in violation. So in a similar vein, as long as I'm going to be away, and I leave well before, it's considered to be completely sealed off, and I'm not responsible to physically remove the chametz.
It's not related to distance, but to time.
It's
related to distance. If you can come back within 30 days.
Well, you'll see. Let's see. Now let's see just a second. Now we're going to qualify it. Amar Abaye Hada Amar Titoch Shloshim Yom Zakuk Levar Lo Amar El Shaddai Tolachzer. Aval Ein Dat Tolachzer Ein Zakuk Levar. So Abaye first says that when we said that if it's within 30 days, you still have to physically remove the chametz. That's only true if you plan to come back over Pesach. If you plan to come back possibly over Pesach, so then you have to remove it before you leave on your trip. But if you're not planning to come back until after Pesach, so then even if you leave after Purim, you still don't have to remove it. So Amar le Rava v'idaito lachzer afilu me Rosh Hashanah nami. So Rava says, I don't understand what you're saying. If you're planning to come back over Pesach, even if you leave before Purim, you should have to remove the chametz, because the chametz is going to be within your purview over Pesach. How can you come back to your house when you know it's filled with chametz? Even if you left before Rosh Hashanah, you'd have to still make sure you get rid of the chametz. So Ela Amar Rava, Hadi Amar Tkadim Shloshim Yom Ein Zakuk Levayer, Lo Amrin Ela Shein Daito Lachzer, Vol Daito Lachzer Afilu Me Rosh Hashanah Zakuk Levayer. So rather, Rava modifies that. He says the only time that we don't require you to physically remove the chametz when you leave before Purim is if you have no intention of coming back over Pesach. But if you have the intention of coming into your house over Pesach, then even if you leave Rosh Hashanah time, you still are going to have to physically remove all of the chametz, because you don't want to come into a house where you're going to find chametz.
So I was wondering about that. Why talk about the 30 days altogether? Either you're planning to come back, you're not planning to come back.
So you'll see the 30 days where it comes from. Hold on to your hats. The Azda Rava l'taime. So Rava goes according to his reasoning. The Amar Rava ha'osa beso otzer kadam shloshim yom ein zakuk levar, tel shloshim yom zakuk levar. that if a person makes his house into a warehouse, which means that it's for long-term storage, so if he does that 30 days before Pesach, then he doesn't have to remove the chametz. But if he does it after Purim, then he has to remove all the chametz in that warehouse. V'kodem shloshim nami lo amrin ela shein daita lefanos, aval daita lefanos afilu kodem shloshim yom nami zoko klevayer. And that's only true if you have no intention of accessing that warehouse over Pesach. But if you have any intention of accessing or clearing out items over Pesach, then even if you assign it as a warehouse before Purim, you still have to remove all of the chametz. Now we get to Michael's question. Hani shloshim yom maya vidatai. Where do you get this 30-day period from? Where does 30 days come from? Kidatanya, as the Brisa says, Shoel in Vidorshin behilchas haPesach kodem haPesach shloshim yom. Because the Brisa says that this is when we begin studying the laws of Pesach. We begin studying the laws of Pesach and really getting into the mindset of cleaning and clearing out chametz 30 days before the Chag. Make sure your wife is aware of this. Cleaning for Pesach does not start Hanukkah time. It does not start Sukkot time. It starts 30 days before Pesach. I don't know if she'll be comforted by this or she'll make her more nervous, but anyway, that's what you should tell her. And like Rashi explains on the bottom line, Rashi says, Lo chala choivas biur alav. There is no obligation. In other words, the rabbis were the ones who told us that we have to physically remove chametz and that it's insufficient just to mentally nullify it. But that obligation only starts 30 days before Pesach. So if I leave and I preclude the chametz's accessibility from myself before that zman biur begins, before the time when the rabbis instituted the obligation to physically remove the chametz, then I'm off the hook. It's only when the time of biur, when the rabbis instituted the zman of biur, which is Purim time, when that time sets in, then I can no longer absolve myself with merely a mental nullification. I have to actually physically remove it. Now, Reb Shimon,
today, if you're going away for Pesach, you don't have to sell your chametz. Within the 30 days.
No. What we do today is we sell everything. We sell everything.
Even if you're going away.
Even if you're going away, you sell everything. So this is more of an academic discussion because nowadays that we sell everything, and we nullify anything that we haven't sold, which is sort of like to cover ourselves doubly. Okay,
and
so
bedika,
we do bedika too. So we cover ourselves triply. Right. I'm saying, but if you're going away, then you don't have to do and you go away long before. So then, you still have to do a bedika. You're right. You have to do a bedika, but they're a limited kind of bedika. Okay. Anyway, Reb Shimon Gamliel Omer Shtei Shabbosos. Reb Shimon Gamliel says that you only have to begin learning the laws of Pesach. According to him, the rabbinic law of removing chametz only starts 14 days before Pesach.
Rosh
Chodesh, exactly. Now, my time at the Tanakama, what's the reason of the Tanakama who says 30 days? So we're going to learn it out from Sukkot. Shaharei Moshe, Omeid b'Pesach Rishon, Umazir ala Pesach Sheni. Because we see that Moshe Rabbeinu gives us the mitzvah of Pesach Sheni on the 15th or the 14th of Nisan for 30 days for the 14th of Iyar to do Pesach Sheni. So you see, you need 30 days of advance notification for the laws of Pesach. Shenemar, as it says, V'yasu v'nei Yisrael as haPasach b'moado, u'chsiv v'yihi anashim asher hayu tameim l'nefesh adam. That on Pesach, Moshe said to the Jewish people that they should do the Korban Pesach, and then it says that there were people who were tamei, they couldn't do the Korban Pesach, and they came to Moshe and they said, what should we do? And Moshe said, well, 30 days from now you'll bring Pesach Sheni. So Reb Shimon ben Gamliel Omer Lecha, Reb Shimon Gamliel says that's not a good source text for 30 days because Aidi da'ari b'mili de pischa masik lehu l'chol mili de pischa. Because maybe I'll argue that in that scenario, because they were already talking about Pesach, Moshe decided to be comprehensive and include the laws of Pesach Sheni. But if you're not obligated to begin the laws of Pesach, maybe you don't have to start 30 days in advance. It's only because they were holding in that sugya because it was Pesach Rishon that he told them about Pesach Sheni. But if it's Purim, maybe you don't have to talk about Pesach until Rosh Chodesh. Now, the question now is, my time at Rav Shimon Gamliel. Where does Rav Shimon Gamliel get the idea of 14 days before? Shaharei Moshe Omed B'Rosh HaChodesh Umazir ala Pesach, because we know that Moshe Rabbeinu commanded the Jewish people on Rosh Chodesh the laws of Pesach. Shenemar hachodesh hazeh lachem Rosh Chodashim. That Moshe said that this month for you is the head of all months. Uchesiv dabrul kol hadas b'nei Yisrael lemor be'asar lachodesh hazeh v'yikchu lahem ish tzela v'esavos elaboyes. That Moshe gave them all the laws of Korban Pesach on Rosh Chodesh. So you see that it's 14 days before. Mimai deberesh yarcha koi dilma bi'arbo bi'archo b'chamisha bi'archa koi. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, hold on a second. How do you know that Moshe commanded them on Rosh Chodesh, even though that's our Masorah, but you don't see that explicitly from the text? The text just says that this month is the first of all months. But
and it
you
says
don't
on
see.
the 10th. On the 10th, you should do such and such.
Right,
as long
but it doesn't say that Moshe gave them this commandment on the first of the month.
Yeah.
So therefore,
It's before the 10th. That's what,
yeah. So you don't see 14 days necessarily from this pasuk. Ela Amar Rabba Barshimi Mishmei de Ravina Mehacha, but rather you see it from the following pasuk. We're going back to Sefer Bamidbar. It says, "Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe b'Midbar Sinai b'Shana Hashenis b'Chodesh Harishon." That Moshe Rabbeinu, in giving them the law in Parshas Baaloscha, where the law of Pesach Sheni is, that law of Pesach Sheni is preceded by Moshe telling them, "Okay, Chaver, we have to do the Korban Pesach." Because this was the year anniversary from the time that we left Egypt. And it was Rosh Chodesh, and Moshe tells them, okay, Chaver, let's make a Korban Pesach. So you see that it's 14 days in advance. So frak the Gemara, but wait a minute. But once again, the question is, you don't see from the pasuk that it was on the first of the month. All you know that it was the first month of the second year, but it doesn't say specifically that it was Rosh Chodesh over there. So Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Asya Midbar Mimidbar. No, so we learn it out from a Gezerah Shava. It says in this pasuk Bamidbar, and it says in a previous pasuk Bamidbar as well. Gesiv Hacha Bamidbar Sinai. It says over here in the Sinai desert. Uchasiv Hasam, and then if you look at the very first pasuk of Sefer Bamidbar, it says Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe Bamidbar Sinai be'Ohel Moed. That God spoke to Moshe in the Sinai desert from the tent of meeting, be'echad lachodesh hashni, on the first day of the second month, right, of this first day of Iyar. So Ma'lahalan Barosh Chodesh, Afkan Barosh Chodesh. So therefore, just like over there where it says B'midbar Sinai, God spoke to Moshe on Rosh Chodesh. So too, when Moshe speaks to Bnei Yisrael on Bamidbar Sinai, in Bamidbar Sinai, he's speaking to them on the first day of the month, which is Rosh Chodesh. So that's where Rabbi Shimon Gamliel gets it from. So now the Gemara's next question is not a question on either the Chachamim or Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. The Gemara's next question is a question on the Torah itself. V'nichtov b'reisha dechodesh rishon v'hada nichtov dechodesh sheni. Based on what you've just taught me, the Torah is out of sequence. Because in Sefer, Parshas Bamidbar comes before Parshas Baaloscha. It's two Parshios before Parshas Baaloscha. Parshas Bamidbar, what is the date on the statement?
Iyar.
It's the first day of Iyar of the second year. What is the Parsha of Pesach Sheni, which is two Parshas later? When does Moshe speak to the Jewish people? Nisan, the first day of Nisan of the second year, a month earlier. So what's later in the Torah transpires a month earlier chronologically. So the Gemara says, why is that? Amar Rav Menashe bar Tachlifa Mishmei Darav Zos Omeres Ein Mukta Meucher B'Torah. So the famous statement, we know that there is no chronological ordering in the Torah, meaning that many times the Torah is extremely organized. Many people misunderstand this statement. Many people think that the Torah is willy-nilly out of order. No, there is extreme precision in the ordering and the organization of the text of the Torah. But sometimes the criterion for that organization is not chronology, but rather another criterion. You understand? So all we learn from the statement is that the ultimate criterion is not always chronology. Okay, so the Gemara now says, Amar Rav Papa lo amran ela bitrei inyane, aval bichad inyana, mai demukta mukudam, umai demeuchar meuchar. So Rav Papa just qualifies this. He says the only time that we're permitted to say that the events are out of order chronologically is only when you're dealing with two separate paragraphs in the Torah. But text that is within the same paragraph always is ordered chronologically. And how do you know this? Di'ilote mahachi klalu prat ein bechlal elamasha bifrat dilma pratu klalhu. He says, because one of the hermeneutic principles of Rabbi Yishmael, the Shlosha Shrei Midos of Rabbi Yishmael is klalu prat. Now, the klalu prat, the general statement followed by the specific statement, the ordering of that is extremely important. because the only way that you can make a klal uprat, where we say that the prat sort of qualifies or defines what the klal is only when the prat follows the klal. And if you're going to tell me there's no chronological order to the psukim, how do you know that it's a klal uprat? Maybe it's a prat klal, and you can switch everything around. In which case, you can't make the hermeneutic application. So therefore, and visu, and vice versa, pradu klal nasa klal moisef ala prat dilma klalu pradu. And if you have a pradu klal that appears in the Torah, that's a different hermeneutic principle, which tells me that when you have a specific followed by a general statement, the general statement is coming to add, not to be defined by the specific, but rather to add to the specific rule. And if you're going to tell me that there's no chronological order, then maybe you can switch around the text and make it a klal uprat instead of a pradu klal. So rather what? So you have to say that there is precision in the organization of the text when it's then it's chronologically organized when it's in the same paragraph. So the Gemara says, "Ihachi afilu b'trein yani nami." So the Gemara says, but wait a minute, you can make hermeneutic derivations even when texts are in separate, disparate paragraphs, and so you should have that problem. So hanicha laman do'amar klalu prat hamiruchakim zemizeh ein danin oso b'chlalu prat shapir, elo laman do'amar danin ma'ika l'meimar. So the Gemara says we have a machlokes when you have disparate texts in the Torah. Can you make a pratu klal or klalu prat derivation? There's one mandomer who says you cannot, and that will work out well according to him. But according to the mandomer who says that even when the texts are disparate, you are allowed to make a klalu prat derivation, what are you going to say? What if they're in two separate paragraphs? And then you look them a mucher b'Torah. There's no chronological ordering. So the Gemara says, no. Afilu l'mandomer danin hani mili b'chadin yanav b'trein yane ein danin. So the Gemara's conclusion is that even when you hold that you can make a klalu prat with disparate texts, that's only when they're in the same paragraph. But if they're in two separate paragraphs, even that mandomer holds that you can't make a klal prat because ein muktam u'mucher b'Torah. Now, there's a lot of yeshiva charade on this Gemara, which we're not going to get into now. Yes.
If that's the case, that two separate places, each one is different. So what about juxtaposition? So, for example, the most famous juxtaposition is the fact that the Mishkan and Shabbos are next to each other. That's why we have
right. So what you're talking about is smuchim, and that's a different hermeneutic principle from klal uprat or pratu klal. When we deal with smuchim, we don't the organization of which is first and which is second is not vital. That's not the issue. The issue is the juxtaposition, as you say, the adjacency of the two psukim. So that's a separate issue. Here we're talking about where the ordering will change the way we make the hermeneutic derivation, because klal uprat is different from pratu klal. Okay, let's go on. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Habodek tzarich sheyavate. Now, another sugya. Rav says that after you do bedikas chametz, immediately at that night after bedikas chametz, you have to say kol chamira v'chamia. You have to mentally make hefker all of the chametz that is remaining in your possession. So my time. What's the reason? Inema mishum perurin halo chashivi. If it's because of maybe crumbs that you didn't find or that are left on the floor, but why should you have to even make them hefker? They're already considered to be hefker because they have no chashivas, they have no significance unto themselves. Maybe you'll argue that you upgrade their importance by virtue of the fact that you lock your house every night, and part and parcel of locking your house is that you lock in the crumbs in your house also. So maybe the act of just locking your house every night upgrades the importance of even the crumbs that are on the floor. So the Gemara says no, because that's not true. Because v'hatanya sofei te'enim u'mishamer sadeu mipnei anavim, sofei anavim u'mishamer sadeu mipnei mikshos mipnei mitlaos, bizman shebalabayis makbid alein asur mishum gazel v'chayavim b'maiser, bizman shein balabayis makbid alein mutar mishum gazel v'putur mishum maiser. The case is as follows. The Brisa says that if I own an orchard where I grow multiple crops, and it's fig season has ended, and there are a few, straggling figs that haven't yet ripened, but they're really not, the primary harvest has already taken place of my figs, and now I'm growing grapes in the same orchard. And I keep the orchard completely protected and gated because I don't want people to come in and take my grapes. What about the fact that it's gated because of the figs? So it depends. If the Balabaya says, I don't want people to take any of the straggling figs, so then if you take any of the figs, then you're a goslin. and furthermore, they are subject to tithing. But what if the Balabaya says, you know what, even though I'm locking up my orchard at night, but I'm only locking it up because of the grapes that are growing and not because of the straggling figs? So then, if a person goes in and takes the figs, he's not in violation of Gezel because the owner already made them hefker, even though the orchard is locked at night. And the same thing is true when you switch from fig season to grape season, or when you switch from grape season and most of the grapes have already been harvested. There's just a few stragglers, and it's now pumpkin season, right? Wabbit season, duck season, right? But I'm saying, it doesn't matter what season it is. The point is that the fact that you lock your property because of the important thing does not make the unimportant thing upgraded to an important thing just because it's in a gated area and a secure area. So the application over here is as well. Just because you lock your house at night, that doesn't upgrade the importance of the crumbs that are left on the floor. That's what we're trying to demonstrate from there. So the Gemara now says, Amar Rava, Gezerah Shema Yimsa Gluska Yafa V'daite Iluya. And so the Gemara says, I'll tell you why. The reason why you have to make a declaration of bittul the night of Pesach is because you may end up finding a loaf of bread, after you do bedikas chametz. And since you didn't make it bottle, you may say, you know what, I like this. I'm not throwing this away. I'm going to keep it.
So it's not for the crumbs, in other
And
words.
it's not for the crumbs. It's for actually you may have neglected to open a cupboard, and you'll actually find a real nice loaf of bread, and you'll find it even on Pesach. And now once Pesach arrives, you can't do bittul, as we'll explain in just a moment. You can't do bittul when the object is asr bahana. When it becomes asr, I no longer can derive any benefit from it. It's considered to be not mine anymore, and therefore I can't nullify ownership of it. I'm stuck now. So the Gemara now says, "V'chi mishkachas le'livtele." So the Gemara says, why don't you make it batal as soon as you find it? Explains the Gemara, because Dilma mishkachas le'labasar isur v'lav birshus kaima. Because if I find it after the time when chametz is asr, so I don't have the option of being mevatel it. So therefore, be mevatel it immediately after you check for chametz.
Why can't you batel it after?
Because once something is asr bahana, once I'm no longer allowed to derive benefit from chametz, it's no longer within my purview. I no longer control. I no longer am a controlling stakeholder in that chametz. I can't do anything with it. I can't nullify my ownership of it. I can't eat it. I'm stuck. I'm stuck as the owner. Yeah, I can burn it, but I'm stuck as the owner as long as it's physically here.
But also you're over already.
And once I find it, I'm over. Yeah. Exactly as Hai says. So frak the Gemara, so the Gemara says, "V'lo matzi mevatel." I can't at that time make it batel. The Amar Rebbe Lazar shnei dvarim einam birshusa shel adam ve'asan hakasav ki'ilu birshusa. That the Torah says that there are two things that are outside of your purview, and yet the Torah makes it as if they are in your purview. And what are those two things? Ve'elohein bor birshusa rabim v'chametz misheishaos u'lamayla. When I dig a pit in Rishus Harabim, even though the pit is not mine, I just dug the hole, but the Torah still holds me responsible for any damages that are caused by the pit. It's my pit, even though it's not my pit. Right? And another example of that is that it's my chametz, even though it's not my chametz. I'm not allowed, the Torah says I can't derive any benefit from it, so it's really not mine from a utilitarian point of view, but the Torah still says, no, it is yours, to the point where you violate a biblical commandment by having it in your possession. So now the Gemara says, "V'niftale be'arba, v'niftale be'chametz." So the Gemara says, well, wait a minute. So why do you have to say kol chamira the night of bedikas chametz? Why don't you just wait until the morning and do like we say it both times, right? We say it at night and we say it after we do bir chametz, right? So why don't you just do it in the morning? So the Gemara says, "Kaven delavzman isuruhu v'lavzman biuruhu dilma pashta v'lo mevatle." I'll tell you why. Because in the fourth and fifth hour, you're not yet obligated to do bir chametz. So you're just sitting having a coffee in the morning of Erev Pesach. You're not thinking about chametz anymore because you did bedika last night, and you don't have to burn the chametz for another couple of hours. So you may forget to do bittul. You may forget to make a declaration of bittul, and therefore we say so. Do it the night before. So then the Gemara says, well, okay, fine. V'niftale b'shis. Why don't you say when you burn your chametz, make your declaration then? The Gemara says that also is problematic because Kaven di Isura de Rabbanan Iluya ki de Oraisa Damya Velav Birshusei Kaima Velomatzi Mevatel. The answer is because even though Midi Oraisa The chametz is still mutter bahana, because it's only asr bahana from chatzos and onwards, and the time of burning it is at 11 o'clock in the morning, not at 12. But once the chachamim made a declaration and they said from 11 o'clock onwards it's asr bahana, even though that's only a rabbinical law, the chachamim have the power to make something no longer within your purview. It's the koach of hefker based in hefker, as Rashi explains. The chachamim have the power to actually deprive you of that which you own. The Chachamim have that purview, right? And once they tell you that an object is asr bahana, even though midiraisa it's still yours, but rabbinically it's no longer yours, and since rabbinically it's no longer yours, you can no longer do bittul at that point. So it turns out that when they tell you to burn it, you can't do bittul at that time because it's no longer yours rabbinically. And how do we know this? The Amar Rav Gidel, Amar Reb Chia Bar Yosef, Amar Rav, Hamakadesh Misheshosu Lamaila, Afilu Bechite Kordenisa, Ein Choshishin Likidushin. As Rav Gidel had taught, as Reb Chia Bar Yosef taught in the name of Rav, that if you want to marry a woman on Erev Pesach, and instead of presenting her with a ring, you present her with a sack of wheat, of chametz, even if it's very, very expensive chametz, it's not a good kiddushin, and if you do it from 11 o'clock in the morning and onwards, from the beginning of the 6th hour and onwards. Why? Because once the chachamim said that this is not your property, the chachamim have that exclusive right to declare something yet not yours anymore, using the koach of hefker based in hefker. And since it's not mine, then even a chash kiddushin there isn't. Once the chacham say that this object is not mine anymore, then I can't be makadesh and isha with it. I can't marry with it. It's no longer mine to sanctify a woman in marriage with it. So therefore, we see from this example that once the chachamim say that it's not yours because it's asr bahana, then you can no longer be mevatel it. So therefore, that's why you can't do it in the morning. So therefore, do bittul already at night. Have a wonderful day.